North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. We bring you the news, the real news. We report it honestly. We analyze the news, again, honestly for bias and fact. We report both. And then what we do is I make commentary. That is not the news. That's simply my opinion. And that leads to your opinion, which is just as valuable as mine. And that leads to debate, which is the final part of the Wells Report. That's what we do. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. Had an interesting little glitch here. I'm trying to figure out just exactly what happened there. There was, normally we just run straight through the entire broadcast on Facebook and YouTube. And I'm trying to figure out whether or not what YouTube is doing. So let's see just exactly what's going on with YouTube, shall we? I want to find out I'm sorry, this is normally not what we do, but this is a good thing. This is a good thing for us to check on. It says it's live. Let's see. I hope I don't create a gigantic mess for myself here when I do this. Let's see. So, yeah. I guess it's still here. Okay. Yep. A few snarky remarks. No charge for those. Yes, occasionally we put those up there. Yep. Okay. So it's still rolling on YouTube at least. And so there you go. I feel much better now. Let's move on. Okay, good. When the Supreme Court convenes next month, they just got finished with an amazingly contentious session that made decisions on a lot of things that changed America. And some of those changes were good and some of them were frightening and so on and so on and so on to a lot of people. But they've got another session coming up. It convenes next month. One of the first cases it's going to consider is how states weigh racial makeup of voters when redrawing their congressional boundaries. The outcome of the case could weaken the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which prohibits states from diluting minority voting power through redistricting. A 2006 decision by the Supreme Court, meanwhile, is having an uneven effect on elections in lower courts, including some that deal with redistricting, others that involve voting restrictions enacted in the wake of the 2020 election. In the 2006 case, the justices signaled that courts shouldn't tinker with the rules of an election in the last minute, an idea that became known as the Purcell principle. All right. So once again, there's going to be a problem here with regards to governors making decisions, unilateral decisions about how elections were going to be run that strayed away from how the legislators determined that those elections were going to be run. Aside from dealing with the underlying questions about the Voting Rights Act and the Purcell principle, the High Court's decisions are having a practical impact on congressional maps used for the midterms. In February, a 5-4 majority allowed Alabama to rely on congressional maps that a lower court said likely denied black voters in that state an additional member in the U.S. House of Representatives. A month later, it tossed out a map of Wisconsin's state legislative districts that included an additional majority black district. In June, the Supreme Court blocked a lower court ruling that required Louisiana to redraw congressional districts to increase black voting power. Now, okay, so the reason that this is coming up is because, once again, these are associated to the racial makeup of voters when it comes to redistricting. If you have ever looked at a collection of congressional districts in the United States, the districts themselves look like a Jackson Pollock painting. They're everywhere. I mean, they're just jiggly and scratchy and so on and so forth, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to create a district for a political advantage. And this is where the problems both start and stop. Who draws the congressional districts in the first place? The legislative districts. Who draws them? The party in power draws the legislative districts every 10 years based on the current census. Now, that actually is a check and balance on political power in a particular given state. If, say, for example, the Democrat Party has a huge legislative agenda and a huge legislative advantage, say, for example, in California, in 2020, they get to redo the congressional districts, redistricting. Okay? That's what they get to do. The Democrats handle it. And very rarely do Republicans ever go into a courtroom and say, no, that district is to this or to that, or destroys a Republican stronghold, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand, Republican Party officials draw the maps in, say, for example, Texas. And before you can say, excuse me, the Democrat Party is already pushing those districts into some kind of either state or federal court. And really, the solution to being left out of redistricting problems for either party is to win the election. How do you win the election? Well, maybe what you do is you do things that benefit the people that you want to vote for you, instead of benefiting yourself or benefiting your party in Texas or any number of other things that have nothing to do with the will of the voters. This is why the judicial branch hates getting involved in politics. Hates it. Because the only real solution is to start in the upper left-hand corner of a state and draw a district that comes up with, say, for example, you take the total population and you determine how many people are in the House of Representatives are going to be there. And then what you do is you divide the population into the number of representatives in the state, and then you set about creating districts that reflect whatever that number is. Let's say 250,000. So you start at the upper left-hand corner of the state, draw a district in 3 dimensions that gives you 250,000 people. Then you start with the next, and so on and so forth, until what you end up doing is creating a set of districts based on geography and population, other than, say, for example, race or affluence or any number of other things. The problem with that is that what you will do is you will create a district that will never change, which is okay with me. But the thing about that is that then what ends up happening is people vote with their feet. Say, for example, if there's an entire congressional district that encompasses all of Dallas, Texas. Okay? All of Dallas, Texas. And what will end up happening is the same thing happens in Dallas, Texas that happens in Chicago or Milwaukee or Atlanta or LA or San Francisco. People will simply leave. So people will simply leave, and that'll change the district. And you start getting into Plano, and you start getting into a bunch of other places, and the political makeup changes as well. There are a few things that politicians do really, really well, but playing politics is one of the things that politicians do really, really well. And this redistricting is the ultimate in sausage making. You don't want to see the decisions they make because you will literally throw up. It's awful. It's just plain awful. And then when the losing party typically goes into a courtroom to try to win something that they cannot win because they don't have the power of the voter behind them, well, that's when things get especially ugly. And that's when things get predictably chaotic. And that's what we see. That's what we see in these big cities. That's exactly what we see. And it stays that way because you have political judges making political decisions in a courtroom that need to be made in a voting booth. And chaos ensues. Chaos ensues. And so when it comes right around to what we're discussing, which is the Supreme Court of the United States involving itself in elections, it is fraught with peril. It is fraught with peril. And then there's something else about this. One of the great pieces of architecture of the Great Society during the Lyndon Baines Johnson, the LBJ years, was the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was a blatantly political mess. It was a blatantly political mess. And yes, what it did was it applied federal rules to local state races. And it all surrounded racism. And what ended up happening with that is well, now you have this extra card you got to play that you cannot dilute minority voting power through redistricting. And the thing about it is that you get down to redistricting again, and what you really should try to do with the districts is to create a demographic mix of the people living in your state and create districts that conform to those demographics. Now, you'll end up with a bunch of weird-looking districts, but then again, you've got that already. But if the state is, say, for example, 20% black, 20% white, 20% Latino, 20% Asian, and 20% other. If you build those districts so that those particular percentages are present in every district, then what you end up with districts that essentially reflect unfairness, if you will, from a standpoint of all the various ethnic groups. So then what you have to do is you have to say, okay, well, we'll give 20% of the districts to black people, and we'll give 20% to white people. We'll give 20% to Latinos. We'll give 20% to Asians, and so on and so forth. And before you know it, you're walking away from it wishing that you could just handle things in a completely different way. But the problem with it is that as bad as it is, it works. And there are problems with it. It's true. But I'm telling you, every time a court gets involved in an elective situation, bad things ensue. And they will ensue this time. I don't know how the Supreme Court's going to rule on that next case next session, but it's going to be a goat rope. Back with more in a moment. This is the Wells Report. I am John David Wells. Make sure you subscribe to this broadcast. If you find value in it, by all means, subscribe to it. Please share it with your friends. Hit like. Likes are good. Likes mean we get points. So send us a few. Also, by the way, don't forget to ring the bell. In other words, there's a little bell icon to let you know when we're on the air. We would love to have you every single day. Support the Wells Report if you'd like to by going to patreon.com/The Wells Report, patreon.com/The Wells Report. You can make a financial donation there that would go a long way, I assure you. This is the Wells Report. We're spending a little bit of time talking about the realities for election politics in courtrooms. And USA Today points out that time appears to be running short for legal challenges to voting restrictions to have an impact before the midterm election, meaning limitations on ballot drop boxes, prohibitions on handing out water at polling places, and in some states, those are going to likely remain in place, even if those laws are overturned later. While the lawsuits will continue long after voters head to the poll this November, the groups challenging the restrictions have faced setbacks in federal court in attempting to temporarily block their enforcement this year. A Florida law limiting the use of ballot drop boxes will likely remain on the books. So too will a Georgia law that reins in third-party groups from mailing absentee ballot request forms to voters. This is good. All of this is good. All these restrictions in place for these elections, good. I'm glad that the courts are at least dragging their feet into weighing in on this, because the legislatures voted for these things, and the legislators need to have their say, and so hopefully that's going to end up happening. Many restrictions were enacted in GOP-led states in response to claims of voter fraud by former President Donald Trump and others. Opponents say restrictions made it harder for disadvantaged workers to cast a ballot. Supporters say the measure ensures election integrity and that a little inconvenience is a fair price to pay. Look, when it comes to elections, you've got to be there because you're supposed to be there. Not everybody who is currently voting in United States elections are supposed to be voting in United States elections. There is voter fraud. Nobody says there isn't. The question is, to what degree is there voter fraud? Well, it's such a small percentage, it really doesn't matter. And I'm sorry, there were about 5 states that were decided between President Trump and Joe Biden by less than 15,000 votes. That's all the voter fraud you need. That's all the voter fraud you need. You got 30,000 votes? There you go. There you go. So the real problems that are presented by the 2020 elections are completely wide open and understood by everybody observing them. And what is so annoying is the mainstream media keeps trying to say that's nothing. No, it is something. Just saying that voter fraud is just a fact of elections, blah, 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 blah. Why? It's 2022. It's 2022. We should be able to have this nailed down. Mike, Bullsh is spelled Bullsh. Bullsh. Yeah. Yeah, we have to have elections that are one ballot per voter on paper and pencil. Polls close at 7, counting begins at 9, results in by 11. Done. And there are no votes that are accepted to be counted after the polls close. Done. That means all the mail-in votes need to be counted already. All the absentee votes need to be counted already. That's what has to happen. This is the Wells Report. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. There's another factor in the elections in the United States that have been brought to all of our attention. And those factors are the factors of personal health among the candidates. This has been especially painful for those of us who have seen the degradation of our president, and that person, of course, is Joe Biden. That Joe Biden is cognitively impaired is not up for debate. It is simply the case. The debate about, well, how bad is it, is immaterial. It's irrelevant. What this creates a presidency run by people who never appeared on a ballot. And that's something that is antithetical to what the people of the United States need from their particular candidates and representatives and governors and so on, and presidents. In the case of Joe Biden, it is clear that someone else is running the administration. It's clear somebody else is doing it, but who are they? Do you know? We can guess. But we don't know. And that's a problem. These are the same people that are crying about how democracy is under attack by the people they refer to as MAGA Republicans. These are the same people that say that democracy is under attack. Well, the presidency of the United States is being run by a bunch of people. Nobody knows who they are. It's certainly not Joe Biden. Certainly not Kamala Harris. Who is it? Why is it that we're in that position? Is because Joe Biden, depending on what you believe his level of cognitive impairment is, cannot fend off someone else running his administration for him. Typically, presidents are very strong-willed. Typically, presidents are very strong-minded people that know exactly what their vision for this nation is, and they act on it. What's Joe Biden's vision for this nation? He's already come out against making America great again. In fact, he calls people that are adherents of that philosophy fascists. And once again, by the way, I want to make this abundantly clear. It's one thing to call other politicians or politicians in general fascists, but to call 74 million American voters fascist, that crosses the line. That crosses the line. And that's the difference that I hold when I start talking about it. I've called people fascists on this broadcast. Leftist, progressive, socialist, anti-American fascists. Because that's who they are. That's what they do. Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, the Squad, AOC, all these people, Ilhan Omar. All these people are fascists. They're totalitarian fascists. But notice, I'm not talking about their voters. The closest thing to a stinging indictment that I got to a set of voters had to do with the voters of AOC. And so I also said something about, I think I said something about Minnesota for electing Ilhan Omar. I said, I don't know that I have any business in Minnesota. Why would I go to a state that would allow themselves to be represented by Ilhan Omar? Why would I do that? Same thing about Queens. Why would I why would I go to visit Queens if they're essentially a den of communists as shown by their governmental representative? But the hard part of that is, why would you go to Queens in the first place, no matter who the representative was? Okay. I didn't want to say that. But this idea that our representatives need be mentally sharp is important. It just truly is. And I'll tell you why. This, unfortunately, is a currently unfolding political race. It involves Senate candidate John Fetterman and his Republican opponent, Mehmet Oz. John Fetterman, who was the Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania, had a pretty serious stroke. It affected his cognitive abilities and his ability to communicate. And I guess it was last week he announced that he would not be debating his political opponent, Mehmet Oz. If you've listened to John Fetterman's speeches, you will note that he is truly struggling. Truly struggling. Very much like Joe Biden. Everything that Joe Biden says is written down on a teleprompter. And he reads it word for word, up to and including the things that shouldn't be said out loud, which is repeat the phrase, unquote. So, I mean, I'm not making fun of our president. I'm just saying that happens. So that's what you'd have to do with John Fetterman, because if he can think of the right answer, he cannot take that thought and translate it into English and then speak it. The guy may be perfectly fine, but he can't express the fact that he's perfectly fine. Why is he still the candidate? I don't know. So when John Fetterman said no, he was not going to debate with Mehmet Oz, well, obviously the elephant in the room became this quote: "If Mr. Fetterman is not well enough to debate his opponent, that raises serious concerns about his ability to serve as a United States Senator." Correct. When you have a stroke that impairs you cognitively, you have to depend on other people. Well, if you're the senator of the state of Pennsylvania, who are you going to depend on? Fetterman, a Pennsylvania lieutenant governor, he was, I thought he was an attorney general. He was the lieutenant governor, suffered a stroke in May, consequently cut down on his public appearances and engagements in the months following since coming back into the spotlight. Fetterman has consistently refused to debate Oz ahead of the November election, despite several attempts by the Oz campaign to schedule an event where they can appear side by side on a debate stage. The Oz campaign has criticized Fetterman's health as a result. Fetterman has cited his health as to be why he will not debate Oz. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, has now weighed in and said that the Oz campaign has used Fetterman's health to its benefit as the election draws closer. The editorial also says that Oz has worked to distance himself from his own campaign statements, trying to avoid personal condemnation of Fetterman's health. But at the end of it, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette editorial board questions John Fetterman's health. Because you get a guy up there that can't fend off the party brokers in Washington, D.C., how long is it going to be before he just votes the way they tell him to vote? Is that representative democracy? Does that represent the people of Pennsylvania? Or does it represent just a free and easy vote for the Senate Democrats? Which does it mean? John Fetterman should have stepped down. He should have gotten out of the way. And he did not. This is a problem. A lot of this election is going to be decided on public health issues, COVID-19 specifically. And what happened during COVID-19 that would give you any kind of, shall we say, confidence that our government should remain in the public health arena? Well, yeah, not much. But it even got worse. It even got worse last week. A federal appeals court blocked a Biden administration plan that would coerce doctors to perform gender transition medical procedures and abortions that violate their conscience or medical judgment. The plaintiffs, a religious hospital and a group of over 20,000 healthcare professionals, launched the lawsuit against the Department of Health and Human Services in August after the federal government mandated the most healthcare providers perform and provide insurance coverage for such procedures. The district court determined that HHS could not interpret or enforce Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act, which prohibits healthcare programs that receive federal funds from discriminating against patients on the basis of sex, to compel Franciscan Alliance to ensure gender reassignment surgeries or abortions, according to the court filing. In May 2016, when this happened, HHS expanded Section 1557's definition of sex discrimination to include discrimination on the basis of termination of pregnancy and gender identity. Secretary of State, Secretary of Health and Human Services Xavier Becerra appealed the district court's ruling. Becerra's appeal was pending. The Biden administration issued a notice of guidance on gender-affirming care, doubling down on that reasoning, which Judge Don Willett found to be flawed, and the Obamacare mandates that hospitals perform gender reassignment surgeries and abortions are therefore stopped. They are blocked. But let's look at the realities of all of this. The realities of all of this is the government mandating what doctors can and cannot do in the surgical suite. What they will do based on government law as opposed to Hippocratic oath, conscience. There are an awful lot of people that are very, very sure that gender reassignment surgery can be described in other ways. Sexual mutilation being one of them. Castration. Forced sterilization. There are all kinds of ways to do this. And the government of the United States has proven that it simply cannot handle anything having to do with public health. The government of the United States should therefore make no law having anything to do with the medical care of the citizenry at all. Now, that's not going to get passed. So what you have to do is you have to have some sort of way of making sure that things are safe and therapeutic. But that has to occur in an objective world of fact, okay, and science. And what got garbaged during the COVID-19 mess? Well, fact and science. How are these facts and how is this science tainted? Well, by politics, of course. The federal government has to stay away from any of this. They have to stay away from it as far as they possibly can. But healthcare is one of those golden targets for totalitarian rulers. Fuel, food, healthcare. You own those things, you own the population. You absolutely do. And that's why they keep trying to work on all of these things. And then you try to keep people in the dark by removing free speech from the public square, either through governmental means or in the case of Facebook and Twitter and so on and so forth, through private means. But you keep negative discourse out of the public square. And then you render the people defenseless. And you got them. We have to get rid of an idea that this government can do anything having to do with public health. And oh, by the way, there's more information about what we may have to deal with regarding public health from guess where? Next on the Wells Report. Stay put. Welcome to the Wells Report. For some reason, I guess my counter started over. I don't know how that happened. I am confused. Welcome to the Wells Report. Gary Olivier, my brother, just got in from work. He asked, what did he miss? Oh, nothing. No big deal. So we're talking about the government and healthcare. Guess what the government is now saying about healthcare? Well, Americans may need to get a single COVID-19 vaccination every year, according to federal health officials. Oh, really? Yeah. They're making it clear the country will be living with the coronavirus for the foreseeable future, which is not that big a change because we've been living with coronaviruses all of the human existence. This is just another one. Dr. Ashish Jha, who is leading the White House COVID-19 response team, says this week marks an important shift in our fight against the virus. It marks our ability to make COVID vaccines a more routine part of our lives as we continue to drive down serious illness and deaths and protect Americans heading into the fall and winter. Today's announcement is not a surprise. The Biden administration has been hinting at such a shift since the spring. It's significant as the government continues to de-escalate its pandemic response. Jha said the newly authorized updated COVID-19 boosters would be free of charge to all who qualify and want them, but future vaccines and treatments may not be as funding for the pandemic response dwindles and the government begins to shift therapeutics to the commercial market. Stick with me on this. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, also said he expects this fall to be the beginning of annual shots for COVID-19, though he added that those who have weakened immune systems might need more frequent protection. Quote, in the absence of a dramatically different variant, we are likely moving toward a path with a vaccine cadence similar to that of the annual influenza vaccine, with annual updated COVID-19 shots matched to the currently circulating strains for most of the population. So what's missing? What's missing? What's missing in this article? What's missing in this statement? What's missing in this trial balloon the government is currently floating? What is it? Do you have any idea? 817-379-2172. Do you have any idea what's missing? Yeah. This is from Dr. Ashish Jha. He's leading the White House COVID-19 response team. This week marks an important shift in our fight against the virus. It marks our ability to make COVID vaccines a more routine part of our life as we continue to drive down serious illness and deaths in protection of Americans heading into the fall and winter. Yeah. And what it's also talking about is the fact that, well, these vaccines, we are in a position where we can make these every single year. Yeah. Make them a routine part of our life. But what's missing? Is a routine part of our life going to be an emergency when it comes to COVID-19? Because we're currently under emergency use authorizations. These shots have not gone through the rigorous testing required for full FDA approval. They haven't. They've had plenty of time to get full FDA approval. They've been able to experiment on the entire American population that actually went out and got shots. They've been keeping track of us the whole time. They have all the information they need. Why hasn't there been full FDA approval? Every day that goes by that there isn't full FDA approval, I get more nervous. Because the only reason there wouldn't be full FDA approval is that there might be something wrong here. We already know that there is something wrong. This is not a surprise because I've had 3 COVID-19 shots and I got COVID after the 3rd shot. Hello? So obviously there's something wrong. But what else is wrong? Are we saying that this shot is not effective? Because that is the inevitable idea that has to be discussed when you refuse to say that we fully approve these shots. Why not? Listen, I'm telling you, they could not have possibly screwed this up worse. And consequently, the idea that the government of the United States would have anything further to do with a public health issue, aside from monitor it and report on it, and so on, and perhaps suggest treatment plans, to do anything more than that risks an absolutely unthinkable future. One that has nothing to do with the United States of America. This has been the Wells Report. Thanks very much for joining us. I will see you again tomorrow. And there you go, my dear friends. Thank you so much for all your support. I sincerely appreciate it. In the genius words, it's sus. Sus? What? Let's see. No, the vaccine has not been approved. It's not had full approval. It's still an emergency use authorization. Sorry, Arthur. It's not a full FDA authorization. It is not. It's emergency use. Come on, man. That's in the newspapers. Even the new booster is approved for emergency use. It's ridiculous. I did check my source, Arthur. I did. God almighty, man. It has not undergone full FDA testing and approval. It hasn't. This is an emergency use authorization. Come on, dude. All right, that's all I got. Thanks very much. I appreciate it.